All right, here we go. Got my favorite sweatshirt. Wipe those clammy hands. Come on, Proctor, let me get started here. Open your test book to section 1, read the directions, and begin work. Good luck. Time starts now. All right, here we go. Passage 1, literature. Ooh, this is my favorite. Passage 2, social studies. Okay, I see you. Hey, this one's not bad either. Oh my gosh, 800, here we come. Passage 3, science. All right, not my favorite, but it's okay. I can do this one. Wait a minute. I haven't seen the history yet, and I haven't seen a passage comparison. Does this mean? No. It's okay. Maybe it'll be on feminism. There's one thing I know. It's women's rights. Imperialism? God, we haven't learned that yet in history. Shoot, okay. Just take it one line at a time. It's okay, you got time. You got lots and lots of time. You have 5 minutes remaining on section 1. Did she just say 5 minutes? Are you guys hearing this? Oh my God, are you done? Okay, you know what? Move on to the last passage. Maybe it'll be super easy. Grab yourself some easy points. Higgs boson? What the heck is that? Yo, College Board, you do know that I'm in high school, right? Oh my God, okay, I don't have time to read this. I don't even know what this is. Okay, so contingency plan. What was it? Okay, I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna put all C's. No, girl, aim higher. Put all B's. Stop work and put your pencil down. And I failed.
Alright guys, I really hope you enjoyed that skit. Obviously, it was a bit of an exaggeration. I just wanted to bring some lightness to what I know can be quite a stressful time for those of you actively preparing for your standardized exams. If you are new here, my name is Jen. I'm a test prep tutor and I make educational content on YouTube around study techniques and productivity tips. So if that is your jam, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. Alright, if it weren't obvious, today we are talking all about SAT time management. I know this is a very common issue that a lot of you are probably struggling with, so today I'm hoping to share with you a couple of practical techniques that can help you more effectively manage your time. Tip number 1, I want you to break up the exam. So let's start by talking about the reading section. Here you have 65 minutes, which to me is a really long time, and I don't really know how to conceptualize that and budget it effectively. What I want you to do instead is to recognize that in 65 minutes, you have to complete 5 passages, and that means you have an average of 13 minutes per passage. Now, 13 minutes is way easier for me to keep track of. When I practice with students, I make sure to hold them accountable to these 13 minutes. If I don't, what I find is they delude themselves into thinking they have more time than they do. So in the beginning, maybe on passage 2 or 3, if they get stuck, they'll spend a long time on those passages and they think that, well, I can just make this up later, right? I have enough time, and they leave themselves with 5 minutes for the last passage. Well, 5 minutes is never going to be enough, and you guys know sometimes the last passage is actually the hardest one. So that definitely is a recipe for a disaster. The same principle here applies to the writing section. On the writing section, you have about 8.5 minutes per passage. And then on the math, I actually like to take more of a per problem, right, timing. So on the math section, you have just over a minute per question, sometimes closer to 1.5 minutes. But if you're spending like 5 minutes on a question, then you know you're gonna run into some issues. Tip number 2, I want you to practice prioritizing. Okay, so this is what I mean. Let's start once again with the reading section. On the reading section, you have 4 types of passages. You got your literature, history, social science, and science. As you practice, pay attention to what types of passages you tend to gravitate towards. Most students have certain passages that they find a little bit easier. Another way of saying that is most students know they tend to struggle the most with certain passages. For some, that is the history. For some, that is the science. The only way you're going to be able to figure this out for yourself is if you practice and you really stay aware of what passages tend to give you the most trouble. Once you know that, what I want you to start doing is to practice doing the easier passages first, the easier passage types. So for me, for example, literature is my favorite. most of the time. And I'm lucky in that way because the exam starts us off with the literature passage. So I can start the exam with the very first passage. But for you, if literature is not your strongest passage, then don't start there because it will hurt your confidence and it will hurt your momentum. What you want to do instead is to jump towards the passages that may be a little bit easier for you. So that may well be social studies. You would start there. And the idea is starting where you are most comfortable will again boost your confidence and set you up well for the rest of the test. The one caveat I do want to mention here is you want to be flexible. So just because you typically struggle with history doesn't necessarily mean that on your actual exam, you're going to struggle the most with the history. So what I mean by staying very flexible is read a passage and 1 minute into it, if you're completely lost, you have no idea what's going on, even if it tends to be a passage that you normally find to be a little bit easier, do skip it. Make sure you skip it. Sometimes, right, the history will actually not be the worst one in that exam. The overall idea here is to never linger on one passage just because it's hard for you. Typically, if a passage is difficult for you, you're going to miss questions regardless. So you might as well save that until the end after you've gotten all the points that you could otherwise. So let's move on to the writing and talk about how this applies here. On the writing section, for the most part, I do recommend you go in order because the passage difficulty, there's not really much of a pattern. So just go in order. The only thing I'll say here is I want you to skip the questions that are really asking about the passage as a whole. So there are questions that say, which of the following sentences is best supported by the main idea in the whole passage? Well, you definitely don't want to answer these questions until you have the entire context, right? Otherwise, the question may not make very much sense to you. So skip those until the end, but other than that, just kind of go in order. Now on the math section, there are some very specific guidance I have here. So the math has the most clear difficulty progression. The math always goes from easy to hard on the multiple choice, and then the difficulty resets once you hit the grid-ins. So my strategy here is I want you to attempt the easy and the medium multiple choice questions first. Skip the hard multiple choice, so like the last couple of questions, maybe the last 3 to 5 questions. Move on to the grid-in section, complete the easy ones there, and then you can come back and do all of the difficult questions. That way, again, you're getting the maximum chance of getting these questions right. Doing it this way will help you maximize your chance of getting the most number of questions correct. Okay, so if you're following me so far, I'm definitely advising you guys skip around the exam. But I can already feel some of you being very resistant to that. And if you don't like this idea of skipping around, most likely you fall into one of 2 categories. The first types of students who don't like to skip are students who have a very linear mentality when it comes to test taking. They like to take tests in the order it's presented. They don't want to skip questions. And I am guilty of that myself, or I should say, back in the day. But I really had to train myself to overcome this tendency because what I found was when I skipped a question, my subconscious is still working on it even when I'm actively working on a different problem. And then when I have about 5 minutes left, somehow my brain just goes into another gear and I'm able to do questions that I don't think I otherwise would be able to. So once I saw that reflected in my score, I realized that this is the only way to take exams. You just have to be comfortable moving around the exam. So again, guys, I got to give you some tough love. You're going to have to learn to overcome that as well and skip around. Okay, but then we have another group of students who are afraid of skipping around because they think they might mess up their answer sheets. Now, this is a real concern, and I do want to give you a tip for how you can minimize that possibility. So I always advise students to mark their answers not only on the answer sheet, but also in the test booklet. So for you, I definitely need you to circle your answers first in the booklet so that you can just transfer them over to your answer sheet. Whenever you skip a question, make sure you mark it both in the booklet and on your answer sheet. You can put a little tick mark or you can circle it lightly on your answer sheet, and that way you'll have a cross-reference so you can make sure you know exactly which questions you're skipping. All right, guys, tip number 3. this is where I want you to maintain your momentum. So when we take a test, typically we get into this flow state, right? This is where you are really in the zone, and I want you to, as much as you possibly can, stay there. And the way we're going to stay there as long as possible is by minimizing our interruptions. I consider an interruption every time you are moving from your test booklet onto your answer sheet. And I want you to stay in that booklet for as long as possible. So rather than transferring answers one at a time, what I would rather have you do is to transfer your answers one page, or on the reading section, one entire passage at a time. That way there is a bit of conclusion before you move on to your answer sheet, and you're not just constantly interrupting your flow state. The next thing here is I do need you to stay very present. So when you are working on, let's say, a math problem, I don't want you to be thinking about that last question you just skipped and already doing mental calculations on what score you could possibly get now that you just missed the question. I also don't want you to think ahead and be like, oh my gosh, I still have half the test to go. What am I going to do? In this moment, I just need you to focus on that one question that you are working on. And the reason is, in this moment, that is the only question that can get you any points. Once you reach the allotted time and you need to move on, that's totally okay. But for now, just keep your focus here. I also want to talk to you real quick about pacing. Of course, you guys know if you go too slowly, you are not going to finish, and that's not good. But I also want to say that going too quickly and making a lot of silly mistakes, that's also not a recipe for success. So what you want to do instead is just to go at a comfortable, consistent pace while getting as many questions as you can on the first try. I want to share kind of an interesting story with you guys. When I talk to my students who have extremely high scores, we're talking scores in the 1530 plus. Those students often tell me that they come down to the wire in terms of taking this test. And it's not necessarily that they're spending so much time checking their work, they're barely finishing on time. And that's because as they're moving through this exam, they're trying so hard to make sure they're getting the question right on the first try. So they're really taking their time annotating, reading the question carefully, so they're not going to rely on their future selves to catch any mistakes. I absolutely agree with this. This was the same way I took my exams. I was not a particularly fast test taker, but I was very deliberate and very careful. The reason for that is I knew in that window of time, 35 minutes, 55 minutes, you are not going to be able to necessarily retrace your steps and catch your mistakes. If you had the opportunity to revisit the test tomorrow or next week, you very well could catch some mistakes. But in that window of time, once your brain has already gone down a thought process, it's very unlikely that it's going to be able to undo the thought process. So again, the key here is just to try to get the question right the first time around, rather than relying on yourself to catch your mistakes and rushing through the test very quickly. Alright guys, I hope you found those tips helpful. Those were my best tips for how you can manage your time more effectively on the SAT. Of course, the best time management tips in the world won't help you if you don't have the concept and the knowledge first. So what I want you to do if you are currently studying for the exam is to spend some time learning the concepts and mastering the techniques. I have a ton of videos on my channel here for specific concepts. I even have a playlist for every section of the SAT, so definitely check those out. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you very soon. Bye-bye.